Sorry about that. Did everyone hear that call to order? All right. I would like to start by saying a roll call member absent is Councilmember Lopez with an excused absence. Pledge of Allegiance will be led by myself and invocation with Councilmember Alvarado. Salute. Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lord, we ask the Lord to continue guiding us, Lord, and help us, Lord Jesus, to do your will, Lord, and help us to just do what's best for our community, Lord, and we just thank you for the blessings you have given us already, Lord, and also thank you for the future blessings. Amen.
We need a motion to approve the agenda.
No changes? Make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Roll call.
Councilmember Alvarado,
Yes.
Givens,
Yes.
Espinoza,
Yes.
and Proud.
Yes. Okay, public comment time. Did we receive anything from the office for public comment time?
No public comment at this time.
Anyone here have public comment? Okay, we'll then move on to management reports. Tonight, we have a budget workshop for fiscal year 2021, 2022.
So, Mayor and Council, this is a continuation of our ongoing budget process, and this evening we'll be presenting the proposed preliminary budget in terms of it being a status quo budget. And our Administrative Services Director Atkins will explain what that means and then provide the staff report. So with that, Bryce.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So as mentioned earlier, this is the second study session for the budget. There's 3 topics that we're going to discuss with council as far as tonight's budget is concerned. First is to discuss the status quo service level budget approach. Second is to review the draft personnel costs at the status quo service level. And then to review the budget format organization of the budget document to be prepared and any modifications that council may want to make to that budget or to those schedules. That's happening again. Could you go ahead and advance to this next slide? So to begin, we'll start with the status quo service level budgeting. And what this process entails is 2 separate components to this process. The first is the establishment of a base budget maintaining the current service levels. The second component is to have separate requests for additional costs. They'll come by staff and be presented to council separately for separate consideration for potential addition to the budget. The proposal is to use the fiscal year 21 adopted bid budget as the baseline. We feel that this is a conservative baseline, given that the revenue and expenditure reductions that were made in response to the pandemic present a conservative baseline. The reduced expenditures include $645,000 in reductions to department budgets, $70,000 reduction in IT fund, and then nearly $5.3 million in the CIP projects that were deferred. So what the fiscal year 21 budget, as using as a baseline, really presents an essential services budget. It maintained mandated and core services, but did so at a minimal and economical level. Duplicating the service levels keeps the baseline budget conservative. We do know that the COVID-19 pandemic, while it appears to be in its closing phase, is not quite over yet. The restrictions are lessening, but are not gone completely. We also know that the federal and state financial mitigation effects on the economy are not yet fully realized. Namely, we don't know how the eviction moratorium, when it's released, will affect our economy. We also don't know how the American Rescue Plan and infrastructure bills will affect the economy as well. So the status quo service level budget process uses the adopted fiscal year 21 budget as its baseline, not the amended. Personnel, insurances, and utilities will increase in order to retain those current service levels. Departments are being allowed to move, but not increase the total services and supplies. What this means is if the department wants to take funds from department services and move it to professional services, they can, but they can't take it to increase personnel. They can't use it to increase their internal service fund charges, so on. Any requested increases that departments will want to have will be submitted through additional needs forms that council will consider and will be separate from the budget document itself. So additional needs forms, again, will be individually reviewed by council during the budget workshops. And they will contain the amount of the increase that's being requested, the line items and the funds that are being impacted, the purpose or what the increase is to pay for, and the department's justification of why it's needed. After consideration, any approved additions that council approves will be added to the final adopted budget. So this is the section on the approach to the status quo budget. Before moving on to the next section, I want to see if there are any questions so far.
We've never had forms that departments had to fill out before, as you just mentioned in here.
Not that I've seen. They may have in years past, but these are forms that were created this year and sent out to the departments.
So they've been using them already currently? Or?
Correct. We sent them out to start getting that information from the departments already.
I'm sorry, it's starting now or it did 6 months ago?
We did about just a few weeks ago for additions that are being requested.
Okay. Yes.
Moving forward, the next section, we're looking at draft personnel costs. So the approach that we're taking to personnel in this budget is that no new positions are being included in the baseline budget. New positions will only be included through the additional needs form. The budget will include merit-based increases. Employees that are eligible for the step increases will be accounted and budgeted for. The steps are equivalent to a 5% increase in the base pay. There are increases, though, that are generated from this increase to those that are dependent on salary, namely retirement costs, bilingual pay, specifically for police employees, certification incentives, education incentives, and payroll taxes like Social Security and Medicare will also be increased with any salary increases.
Okay, before you turn the page, let's go back to the top one on the approach when it says no new positions. I've never heard from the start in government that we have to dictate. Well, that's a strong word, isn't it? We have to approach the fact that we have no new positions.
So this is the approach to the baseline budget. And so the thought is that we're going to present to council in a draft budget book based on current service levels, so current employees only. If there's any requests from departments for additional positions, they'd be on a separate form that's going to be provided to council for you to consider, and the departments will present those additional needs forms to council for your consideration.
So is there a reason that we're doing this? I mean, what is the reasoning behind forms? Why is it changed?
It's to identify, so we didn't want to work in any increases and just work into the budget. We wanted to make sure that they're identified separately for anything that's going to increase service levels, either positions, new contracts, new programs being provided. We wanted to really break those out and identify them separately for council. So there's extra attention brought into those.
Okay.
So again, next slide. We do know that health insurances will increase. EIA health program is the provider that the city uses. Their annual average statewide increase for their services is 5.6% as far as their rate increases. The rate increases take effect mid-year, so typically in January. So we're projecting 2.8%, roughly half of the annual average for health insurance costs this year. This equates to a $50,400 increase compared to the current 21 level of benefit cost. On this slide is the draft combined cost increase. It is important to note that this excludes the modified community correctional facility personnel costs in the 21 number. It also excludes workers' compensation, part-time and overtime costs. So these are full-time employee costs. Fiscal year 21 saw a budget of 12.1 million. For fiscal year 22, we're looking at 13.5 million, a difference of rounded up of 1.4 million, which is equivalent of 11.2% increase. Sure.
I didn't know what line. So we're seeing a $1.3 million increase for just full-time employees.
Correct.
And I guess I'm getting ahead. You're going to explain what that's coming from here shortly, I presume. Yes.
Yeah, so that was, so we talked a little bit, so a few of the items before were the step increases that we have. We also have health insurance. Aside from that, the base of the increase is uncertain as far as which ones are triggering from workers, whether it's health insurance, dental insurance, if it's the reimbursement basis. We'll talk about that in a little bit when we talk about the line items and breaking out the personnel line items. Additionally, we used a salary model to project the cost for this upcoming year. We do not have the salary model that was used for the previous budget. So to do an item by item comparison of which staff positions maybe they've worked on it, or if they had used an older version of the salary model, we don't know exactly the specific detail what's changing between the model that was used for the 21 budget versus this current budget.
How many FTEs?
109.
Thank you.
So on this table is each department's cost increase. This table is including the staff report and identifies the department, each department, the amount of the 21 adopted budget, again, excluding workers' comp, part-time and overtime, and then the 22 current projection that we have. Most are increasing between some as low as $4,000 to $5,000. A good number within the $20,000 range, but we do have a couple of bigger items. So I'll go down the list. Animal control is seeing an increase of approximately $20,000 up to $292,000. The building department is seeing as one of the departments that's seeing a larger increase of about $189,000. This is primarily related to the building inspector 2 position that is going in. Building maintenance increased by $5,000. Again, these are approximate numbers. City clerk's office, $24,000. The city manager's budget went up $265,000. This is related to the reallocation of the city manager. It was partially being charged to the economic development department. And so we've removed that. You'll see later on the economic development department has seen a reduction. Additionally, it's the move of Chief Lozano from the Modified Community Correctional Facility to serve as Emergency Management Director. Code enforcement is seeing a $23,000 increase. Economic development is seeing a $106,000 decrease. Education, a $23,000 increase.
Excuse me, we have those figures, but I want to know some explanation when they go down or when they go up. I mean, there's some detail on all of them. I mean, if it's an automatic increase or decrease or whatever it is.
Yeah, so the increases that you see for the items aside from the building department, city manager's office, economic development, the others are all increases based on the step schedules and what we're seeing as a cost now. The cost increases could vary when an employee gets married and goes from an employee-only medical insurance to an employee plus family. There's multiple changes within personnel each year as far as what it is. Again, like as I mentioned before, we don't have that granular level of detail from the previous budget team on what they used to develop those personnel costs for the fiscal year 21. So I couldn't say it's an increase of, I couldn't tell you it's an increase of $3,000 in health insurance, or if there's an increase in if somebody received the next education stipend. So the data is pulled from our current pay schedules, what they're being currently paid right now with the benefit levels that are selected currently and being paid out of our systems today. And so that's what's been used to create the new budget. And so this is looking at the sum total within those departments. When the budget is presented, the budget document will have this amount broken down to salary, health insurance, vision, dental insurance, and have all those items listed out.
So you stopped with economic development with a decrease. So
Correct.
what is that?
Of $100,000. So that is the relocation of the city manager reallocation. So the full cost of city manager is now in the city manager budget, whereas they had about approximately half of the pay in economic development. It also has the removal of the project manager because that was converted to the building inspector 2, which was the increase mentioned in the building department earlier. And then there's also a slight reduction. I was also allocated partially in economic development, and that's been moved to finance.
And that's just for your convenience?
It's to make it a more accurate picture of what the expenditures are for the economic development effort. So the economic development business managers in there, planning to have a portion of it. 50% of the city manager sounded a bit high for that allocation. Now, both of those are in the general fund.
Where does the funding for KEDC come out? Do we reduce that, or what's that stand at?
No, that would be a service and supplies. So those budget numbers are coming, again, those are status quo. So the department can recommend changes to that, but that would be a contractual service and economic development department. So these are just full-time employee pay totals. So I'm going to go back to
Education?
So the education, an increase of 23,000. Engineering is 26,000. Financial services, 49,000. Human resources, 51,000. Information technologies, 43,000. Parks and trees, 51,000 increase. The planning department is 28,000. Police, 490,000 increase. Rail is $4,000. Refuse is a $29,000 increase. Shop maintenance is a $4,000 increase. Streets and sidewalks, 53,000. Transit is a reduction of about $9,000. Wastewater, a $34,000 increase. And water, $66,000 increase.
Can I have this remade with current versus proposed headcount for each one of those? Thank you.
Certainly.
I'm sorry, what was it? What was that request? I didn't understand what you said.
So what I guess I'm still not quite understanding out of this chart is, what does that headcount look like, right? So we're, an example that you're discussing on the city manager side is now that line item has taken the full brunt of the city manager costs instead of half of it being in economic development. So what I'm looking at is and each one of those branches, what was the head count, right? It could be economic development, could be a good example, right? It would have been 1.5, where it's now on the proposed, it's 1, unless Bob acts is like 1.3. I don't know, Bob. It's 1 versus now on the city manager, instead of it being 0.5, or I don't know what falls underneath that. Now it could be 1.5 because we're adding in Chief Lozano. So I just need to see what that looks like on a comparison, because it's in my mind and running numbers and percentages, it's just still not adding up to me.
Not a problem.
Because we had that kind of method in the
Yeah.
past where you got,
No, that's what it is.
we had that kind of method in the past where you only have a half or 1 or something in each department. And and that equals up the cost of a manager's department or title. So he's not doing that. Is that the concern or?
Well, I'm not seeing it here. And there are some pages, if I look through the agenda, where that head count does exist, but it's not broken out like I'm accustomed to. So I'm using the city manager quite often here, but, and I'm sorry for the echo if you guys are hearing it, I apologize. But that's a good example, because as a city manager, you're taking care of a city, which means a piece of your cost is allocated to water, refuse, waste, business development, the city manager itself, right? So I'd like to see what that looks like as a whole. I'm just not understanding how those numbers jive to a head count, because seeing an increase of $1.3-ish million is substantial. And if we're calling it a status quo, I'd like to understand how it's a status quo and we're just retaining what we already had. But seeing $1.3 million, if you gave a 5% across the board, plus with the insurance, it still is only half of what I'm seeing here. So none of that's making sense to me. There's a number missing in my mind somewhere. So I'm just looking for the details so I understand it more, because this isn't working for me.
Okay, so would it help if he went ahead and just explained as far as, for an example, city clerk, if, the 21 adoption budget for city clerk was 119, and the current projection for 22 is 143. There's an increase, right?
Right.
So you want to know why, or what's causing the increase in detail or in summary?
I think the head count would give me a little bit of clarity in that. In some situations, I can understand it's either an increase or an insurance thing that's changed. Something could have changed with PERS. There's a lot of ins and outs, which I get, but I think the head count for me would just give me a little bit of an understanding of what's going on here.
So it would help if we just put head counts as far as person.
No, you're good.
So would it help if he just says the reasoning is because of X amount of employees, the head count, you're referring to head count?
Yeah. Just
Not as far as pencils and papers and paper clips and stuff like that?
include this, right? This isn't a supplies conversation, right? I just want to make sure that's a good question.
Correct. So this is just the full-time personnel. So what we'll do is we'll put together, so we, again, this was to give just an idea of the increases that we're looking at. The detail was planned to give in the budget book itself, but we can definitely produce that and show council the increases or the differences of the head count between what was in 21 versus what is being proposed today. We'll break it down by department, and that'll identify the changes or the changes in allocations, if any, and then that can associate with the increase. We'll also at that point would have the breakdown between, what's salary, what's medical and dental and vision, et cetera. And so you can see, we won't be able to see all of those, like I mentioned, and we'll talk about in a little bit later on. Those are all lumped together in previous budgets and to workers' benefit, but we can provide a combined amount so you can see what is the salary difference versus what is the benefit difference. And that might help include that as well.
The head count would be important. That was a good question that he had about, just making sure that there's nothing else in it. It's just full-time employees. And it goes for both, right? I'm just as concerned about why I'm seeing increases. At the same time, I'm seeing decreases. And if insurance goes up every year because we have a fantastic government system and they love to just screw us over with insurance, I understand that's always going to be an issue, but then when I see a number go down, then I have to ask, well, did we lose somebody in that department? Because it should at the least stay the same unless somebody's moving out or Yeah, I have concerns on both sides. It's not just the increases, but I like to understand what's happening on both sides of that.
Certainly.
So that still keeps the question, why is there a $25,000 increase in city clerk?
Correct, and we'll provide that, but that's the amount, and like I said, in fiscal year 22 is the amount that we have when we do the salary model currently. So that's looking at the total cost and expenditures. What I have is from the previous budget team is just the totals from each line item in their budget document. I do not have the breakdown of how they came up with their costs. Does that make any sense? So their
25
granular level detail.
It's a
doesn't have it.
substantial amount, and so you
is a
can't tell me
substantial
why we raised it 25,000.
I can compare and we'll produce that for the next report. What's the salary increase amount versus what's the benefit increase amount? And we could process that way. It may also be allocation as far as if the city clerk in the previous budget was being split over a couple of different departments and we're housing her now in just 100% in her own department. That could also be part of the increase.
Okay.
I have a question, Bryce. You're calling it a status quo, which means I understand that some things automatically go up, but what's the difference between the status quo budget and then the one that you're proposing? What's that gap?
Well, the status quo budget that we're identifying is not a status quo budget of the amount as far as total dollar figure for personnel, but what it is to maintain the status quo service level, the status quo number of employees that we have. So with the cost increase that we have from health insurance, step increases, that we'll see an increase in that amount regardless for those causes. And then the question is, that's being proposed is, what's the difference between the 21 and the 22 budget that's being proposed right now? And the issue comes down to what was used in the previous budget. Again, not having that. So when calculating this cost, we use a very complex salary model. And what it does, it takes each individual person and identifies their total costs to salaries, benefits, medical insurance, FICA, Medicare, all the costs combined together. And then it splits it in an allocation or a percentage of their time into the different budget departments that we have on the screen. Now, I have that for ours because we created it. And that's part that's missing of the information that I have as far as what was developed in the 21 fiscal year budget. So I don't have what the amounts they had individually for each benefit level, only the amounts that they split across each department. And so the key difference that we have is, again, keeping the same number of employees. We're budgeting out the amounts the employee costs currently and what we're projecting into the next year. So again, halfway through the year, we expect health insurance to increase. We're increasing it by half of the statewide average, 2.8%. We know that certain employees are getting a step increase. So when we look in the current employee records and we see that somebody isn't at the top step, we assume that a performance evaluation will come out that attains a certain level needed in order to earn that merit step. And so we're increasing that pay up that 5%. So that's the key thing. So the position numbers are staying the same, but the cost for those positions will increase.
Mayor, Council Member Espinoza, if I can help provide some distinction here. When we talk about status quo, it's more from a policy level. So as a city, we look at service level and we look at 3 different service levels. We look at, service types. We have mandated, core, and discretionary. Your mandated services are those that were required by statute or regulatory, like wastewater, water. That's an example of mandated because we're required to provide those regardless. Then you have core services, which is what we as a city decide to do that's important to the quality of life, right? And then you have discretionary types of service. Those are the community feel good, like we might help participate with certain community events. Council may want to do a new project that may enhance a certain neighborhood. You don't have to do it, but they're discretionary because you might have some extra money. So you apply some funds towards that. So you have mandated, core, and discretionary. Within each of those, then you have service levels. So you have a basic service level, you have an enhanced service level, and an optimum service level. So let's take law enforcement, for example. Putting an officer in a patrol car and having them patrol, that's a basic model. Okay. You put a K9 unit or a traffic unit, that's an enhanced level of service because you're doing something above and beyond. All right. Some cities may have a mounted unit. That would be an optimum level. It's not basic, right? Because it's not mandated. It's not something above and beyond that improves the quality of life like a K9 or a traffic officer, but it's more for certain events. You might put them out there because, you know, certain festivals, kids come out, you know, they do photo ops, whatever. That's an example of optimum level. Okay. So when you look at service levels, certain service types, when we talk about status quo from a policy level, is maintaining our existing level types in our level services. So what we're proposing is not to increase our services, nor change them from basic to enhanced from optimum. So whatever we have today, so again, using the example we have with law enforcement, whatever that service model we have that our police department currently deploys, we're saying we're going to keep it the same. We're not proposing to do any layoffs. We're not yet increasing staff. We're not changing our service levels from basic to enhanced or optimum. We're keeping it what it currently is. It's without saying that, like any business, on an annual basis, you're going to see an increase in certain operating and personnel costs. Your insurance costs are going to go up, fuel's going to go up, utilities are going to go up, your workman's comp is going to go up, your liability insurance is going to increase. All of those are beyond our control. So those will increase your budget amount. Okay. Policy level status quo is your service levels and service types. The dollar amount is going to change because the cost of goods, cost of services, by the very nature of what we do, is going to increase. So let's say our budget is 15 million. We're saying from a policy operating level, we're not going to change our service models or service types, but the budget amount of 15 million is going to increase because of what I described. Those costs are going to go up on an annual basis. So I just want to make that distinction. So on the personnel costs, we'll provide you more detail on that for the breakdown. I think that's what I'm understanding from Mayor Pro Tem Gibbons, is differentiating here on what are those cost numbers and how did they tie back to the contributing factors that's resulting in an increase. By way of example, we provided the draft personnel allocation. Mayor Pro Tem, I don't know if you had a chance to see that. So is this something like what you are accustomed to seeing in the past, and then you just want more detail on this? So
Part of me is really curious. It almost feels, and I could be wrong, but I'm going to tell you how I'm feeling. It almost feels like we're getting a whole new draft process of our budget process, and we have had in the past an incredible budget review process. It's extremely detailed with the information I'm asking for. So what I'm seeing and hearing feels like no one has shared that with you. And that's where maybe I have a little concern is, I went back into 2019. I pulled that last one up there and I have a breakdown of hours per department. So back to the idea of city manager, I can see that 80% was charged off in the city manager fund, 20% of it was charged off into economic development fund. So I can see that breakdown. I see exactly where it's at. And that's why I'm looking at this and trying to figure out where did this come from? Because this is new to me. I see it a little bit different in the detail. And to step back, I do understand what you're talking about in regards to increases. That is true. There's always a cost of living increase. We understand that. There's always an increase in insurance. We can't get around that. There are increases that occur. Fully agree with you on that. And even if you kept everything the exact same, we're just going to end up getting hit with it. We see that. But that number, call it a baseline number, doesn't match what that increase is. There's an off somewhere. And that's where I'm trying to put this in my mind is why am I seeing that off somewhere? That's all I'm trying to figure out.
No, and that's helpful. Again, I just wanted to make the distinction of status quo from service level, policy level in terms of operation versus the status quo of the dollar amount, because you can adopt a status quo budget year after year and the dollar amount is going to change. It's never going to be status quo. So the distinction is status quo is in operations. We're not increasing service levels or decreasing, and we're not changing the service types from enhanced to or basic or anything like that. It's the same. So the way that's, I just wanted to make that distinction. That's what commonly referred to when we say status quo budget.
Okay, I want to add to that, though. I understand what you're saying. That makes sense. But before that, we had a tough time understanding our budget. And I can truthfully say that Jim Zervis simplified it as best he could so that we had the breakdown and we knew exactly. And if you had a question, you could answer it because it was there. And now I understand in the preliminary reports that we receive, you're going to change after this year, you want to change our format. And so what are we going to go to when we already have the most basic, simple, and what's the reason for changing it?
So just again, to clarify, the workshop this evening is to get your input on the format and structure of the budget that you want to see. If you read the staff report, it's outlined in there, and we even provided what the sample budget document looks like to illustrate. And we're asking your feedback if that's what you're is that the practice you're accustomed to seeing the budget? And if it's not, then tell us how it is you're accustomed to seeing it so that we can make those modifications so that when we do present to you the draft budget, it will be consistent to in the practice of the way you've seen it. So as Mayor Pro Tem Givens just said, he provided an example of how in the past, the previous director provided a lot more detail in terms of hours worked versus percentage of an employee's time, how it's allocated. So cities typically do it by a percentage. So they'll look at, let's say it's the city manager. They'll say 10% of his time is spent on administration on and so forth. But what I'm hearing is that the former director went one step further and broke it down by hours. So if there's 2,080 hours in a typical work year by an employee, regardless of position, the typical hours is 2080. What I'm understanding is that the former director took that 10% and converted it to hours. So it's 208 hours were spent in one department, 400 hours in another, and on and so forth. I think that's what I'm understanding of how it was broken down. So it's a matter of, instead of percentage, convert it back to hours, and that, right.
The percentage is fine. It doesn't matter. I mean, a full-time salary employee is 2,080 hours. So if you're going to tell me that 80% of that time is allocated to CM, then all I'm going to do is take 2080 and multiply that out by 80%. And it's going to give me a number probably in the range of like, oh, I don't know,
1,800 and something.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a really, I'm good with that because a salary employee doesn't go beyond that. Now, there may be incidentals inside of that. Okay, understandable. That's easy. Percentage is easy for me.
Okay. So if I look at this sheet that we provided with the response to your email where it's got the percent allocation, we can add a couple more columns, and where it's broken down by percentage, there's a memo up on your dais that was provided that we received a inquiry from Mayor Pro Tem earlier today, and we responded via email. But not knowing if all of you would have had a chance to review your emails we provided. I know we just received those questions this morning.
Yeah, those questions I just sent out earlier today.
So in the interest of time that the email was from today and the response was today, we provided the hard copy. It was this afternoon after I.
Yeah,
got
I know I received the email. I don't know what time I
Right,
received the email.
from the inquiry that I had from Mayor Pro Tem, we worked on it and then we send it off. And for that fact, we provided a hard copy. So in this sheet here, what I'm understanding from you, Mayor Pro Tem, is if we added a column, we have it broken down by percentage here. If we added a column and you can do the formula, percentage times 2080 and put another column, it'll kick out the hours. I mean, we don't have to do it manually. It's simply a formula and that's it.
And again, I don't need the hours. Just show
Right.
percentage and life is good.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
down. Go to the next slide. Huh? No worries. If there's other questions on that, I'm happy to answer. Okay. So the next one is talking about the chilled positions. So in the fiscal year 21 budget, the budget was approved with savings measure of chilling 6 positions. So they're authorized but not funded. These include a streets foreman, a laborer 1 position, a maintenance worker position, a police lieutenant, community services analyst, and a finance clerk. So as far as the baseline budget, we are proposing that they remain chilled. Part-time and overtime costs are anticipated to remain going to be remaining the same. Part-time hours will adjust to match the budgeted amount that's been approved or that was approved previously. If an increase is needed to address operational concerns, departments may request increases of council. So the next section is talking about some proposed changes in line items in departments, namely consolidating facility maintenance cost line items, and then expansion of personnel cost line items, and also the removal of the MCCF from the budget document. So the first one is the proposal for the facility maintenance line items. So in the budget, there are 9 different facility-related costs that were distributed out to each of the different departments. They include janitorial, landscaping, maintenance, utilities, water, sewer, refuse, power, and natural gas. We are proposing to consolidate those line items in each budget and move them to the building maintenance charges line item. The building maintenance fund will still have all 9 of those line items, and departments will be charged proportionately, and their costs will continue to be tracked. But it improves our accounting and tracking into single line items for the departments, also though for processing invoices and streamlining that process. Again, costs will be tracked and allocated to departments proportionally through the user charge cost allocation. The other change we're going to do is a bit of the reverse, which is the personnel line items. So right now, all benefits are lumped into one line item, which calls fringe or worker benefits. And we are wanting to break those out into the 17 different line item codes. This would remove essentially the fringe worker benefits and create a cell phone allowance line item, auto allowance, education reimbursement, one-time compensation, miscellaneous reimbursements, bilingual pay, education pay, certificate pay, canine handler pay, training officer pay, retirement supplemental payments, other post-employment benefit health insurance, dental insurance, vision insurance, and life insurance. And so the purpose of the expansion is for more specific tracking, reporting, and budgeting of personnel costs. Unlike the maintenance facility costs that we just talked about, there is no other location for these costs. Having them rolled into the one line item makes it harder to determine what each benefit costs and what increases or decreases have been experienced. So for example, if you look in the current fiscal year 21 budget, there's no way you can tell from the budget document how much was being paid into retirement. The additional change that we're looking for is MCCF being removed from the proposed budget. The funds will remain in the financial system. If there are any transactions that are needed, a request will come before council to amend the budget to add it. And then the only change that's resulting from that we've discussed today, obviously, is the conversion of the chief of corrections into an emergency management director. So the next section is looking at the budget format and organization. So the budget book is proposed to maintain the same format organization as the fiscal year 21 budget book. The intent of this review is to review the various schedules that are in the budget to see if council wishes to modify them or add additional financial schedules to the budget document. The examples that we'll discuss are provided from the fiscal year 21 budget. And the numbers that are contained there are from that prior budget. They're just illustrative examples and not the numbers for this year. So the budget begins with a budget message, which is simply the background information on the budget and its development. Then there's a schedule for significant operating budget changes, which is a list of all budget changes in excess of $5,000. Staff is not proposing any changes to that threshold. The next section in the budget typically is the budget and fiscal policies, which is a review of the policies, statements of if the proposed budget meets those policies, and if not compliant, how staff is proposing to make the budget become compliant. There's a section then to guide the guide to reading and understanding the budget, which informs readers about the sections and the types of funds within the budget. Then there's a city staff and officials with an organization chart. Council is typically listed on the second page of the budget. And this will just have sections regarding department heads and the full organization chart. And finally, once adopted, the resolutions for the budget and appropriations limit are added at this point. So this is an order from the fiscal year 21 budget adopted last year. So this is the start, and this is the first of the schedules that we're going to seek council input on. So this is the all fund summary, and what it features is a listing of each fund, starting with the general fund at top, and then categorized by the various fund types. So all the enterprise funds are listed, community correction facility funds, which in the update for this upcoming year, that section will be empty. Special revenue funds, and then the capital project funds, and then finally internal service funds. It reviews the beginning fund balance on the left, proceeds with revenue, covering the operational expenses, capital projects, and transfers and other sources used. The second column from the last is the net gain and loss, and then finishes with the ending balance. The one question I did have on this chart for council, I know this came up as a topic at the last study session regarding the internal service funds. So in this chart, the internal service funds are listed as separate expenditures at the bottom. Essentially, those expenditures essentially are counted twice because the internal service fund charges are also within the other funds. I'm not proposing to remove those, but instead add a footnote to identify that those charges are also included in each of the department's budgets. I want to see if council has any concerns with that, or if there's any other changes that are one on the schedule. Would you be okay with just a footnote then at the bottom, just identifying that they are essentially separate accounted? Okay. The next is the citywide expenditures and uses by funding source. Again, it starts with the table that identifies the various funding sources from the first page. Again, same question on the internal service funds. At the bottom is a table. So I assume we'll approach with the same process, just adding a footnote to identify the potential double count. The general fund summary of activity is just that. It's a very high level summary table. Just identifies revenues and transfers in, and expenditures. It breaks it out: personnel costs, operations and maintenance, capital outlay, capital projects, and then sums them together with a chart. If there's any, please let me know if there's any changes or any additional information that you're wanting on any of these schedules. Fund balance analysis by type. Just look at the fund balance, what assignments are in there, and then identifying the total available unassigned fund balance. And then again, also includes a chart and table. Moving on to the next one, the general fund summary. Again, is a slightly more expanded version of the previous tables. Looking at the revenues, the expenditures are broken out by functional area. If you notice in the middle of the table, you have the general government, public safety, community services, and projects, and totals that way. And then it combines the fund balance, available fund balance numbers at the bottom. This is the next table is the recurring revenue expenditure analysis, again showing the analysis for the recurring revenues at the top, less any non-recurring, and the same for the expenditures at the bottom. One change I would like to make to this is to remove the authorized but unfunded positions. Since they are being budgeted at zero, they're not really a deduction from the recurring expenditures. And so proposing to take those out from this table. Council has any questions about that? Let me know. The next is the other revenues and transfers details list. This is essentially all the non-tax revenues that are collected into a table. We are not proposing any changes to this table. Okay. So as a total revenue summary, this is a combination of the taxes and then also the fees for services schedule, which follows. Again, identifying the tax at the top, departmental charges beneath that, and then a table at the bottom showing a graphical representation of that. The next schedule that we have planned in the budget, again, is the taxes and non-fees for services. This starts to identify the line item numbers for the broad taxes, tax revenues of the city. Again, broken up by common areas, property tax, sales tax, use of money and property, motor vehicle license fees, and then other revenues. Again, we're not proposing any changes to that, but happy to make any changes that council may desire. Next is the total expenditure summary. For, again, this one is just the general fund. Again, it identifies by department each of the expenditure totals. And again, provides a graphical representation of it. Okay. The final slide, these next three slides are the actual department budget. And this is, I think, may start to kind of talk about what the format is and includes the allocations of personnel as well. So each of these pages, this example is the police department, but it begins with a description at the top, followed by a summary level of revenues, and then the expenditures by the three categories: personnel cost, operations and maintenance, and capital outlay. Then has a graph for the summary and revenues and expenses. The police department does have a couple of unique charts to them. So they have a per capita policing cost per year chart. Then each department has at the bottom the fiscal year prior highlights and accomplishments, and then the next fiscal year's goals and objectives. It looks like I got cut off there on that scan, but at the top, you can see this is the format that we'll take as far as the employees within the department. And it has the allocation percentages and the total at the bottom for each department. And then what's cut off there is there's a sworn law enforcement per thousand population chart in the middle there. You'll see it on your slides in your packet. And then authorized full-time employee chart, which basically captures this data in a graphic. So that's the department report, except for the last one, which is the line items. So we may have gotten it corrupted here. Something went awry. Okay. So if unfortunately the slide looks like we have some issues with that in your packet. If you go to page 21 of your packet.
Can I ask a really bad question?
Go for it.
Why is the GIS coordinator and technician under the police department?
So the GIS coordinator, they handle some of the geographic information for the PD. If there's, I don't know if Chief can provide any more than that, but they essentially do mapping services, addresses for buildings. And so the maps are used by the police department for dispatch. So that's why they're partially charged there.
Never asked it before. I figured I'd ask now. Thank you.
So on page 21 has the detail activity, which is the line items, each line item for the department. This is also where we're proposing those changes as far as expanding the personnel line items. So you see at the top, under expenditures, it's at the fourth up from the bottom, has worker benefits, large amount, 1.5 million. We're going to break that out in the proposed draft to identify what is, health insurance, what's dental insurance, what's retirement with PERS, et cetera. And so that way it provides a little bit more detail than just having them all lumped in together in one worker benefits category. And then on that same table, if you look towards the bottom, you'll see in the expenditures, water, sewer, refuse, power, natural gas, all lumped together, about a fifth of the way from the bottom. And those are what we're proposing to consolidate down into the internal service funds. So the next of the schedules that we're going to go over with council is the capital improvement plan. Again, keeping consistent with the same design that was in the current book, which is 2-year actual priors, followed by a current year projected. And then the second page would be the proposed year and the next 4 years for the 5-year total. We're not planning any changes to that, but want to see if council wanted to have more information in the capital improvement plan. None, we'll move on to the next one. Oops. This is the staffing summary that's proposed to be in the budget. Again, it's the same as in the fiscal year 21 budget. Again, this one identifies by position and which fund they're accounted for within all those classifications. So this was the planned use. Would council prefer this to be by department instead and the positions under them, or leave that in the department sheets and keep this chart or this table the same? Okay, all right, we'll keep that. The last one is a long-term debt summary. Again, which basically just identifies the debts that we currently have outstanding, the terms that were applied, and then the original balance, 21 payments, and then the future payments that are left. So the one, I did have a question, this one, I would like to add a column, additional column to talk about or identify the number of years remaining in the debt. That's one thing that's not included on this table. So that way council knows how many years are remaining on each of those debts for payments.
Wouldn't that be the maturity date?
It is the date, but the thought is just to have identified 3 years remaining for in case Susan figure.
It's up there.
Okay. Keep that the same then. Okay. So were there any pieces of information or schedules that council would like to add? Any information that if it was not present that we want to add to the budget document?
I just want to make some notes here. My understanding, my objective is to make this as transparent as possible, as easy as possible to understand it. I'm hoping we're communicating. I think one of the biggest thing is communication. We've learned that communication, we sort of lack of communication. So I'm hoping we're doing that. And with this time, I don't, we don't want to make this very complicated budget process. I understand you're new, things have changed a little bit, and I see, and there's a lot of concern. So I'm hoping tonight, right now, at this moment, we could clarify these concerns and address these concerns, so this won't become complicated and difficult and something that's very depressing. So I don't think that's the objective. The objective is just present a budget for everyone to understand, be transparent, and not become a dog and pony show concept. So I I just want to make sure that council, whatever concern council has, that they just share their concerns. If they want to try to go back to the old method where Jim Jervis was practicing, I don't know how hard that is to go back to that process or to that style, because of just the way we understand it. We seem to understand it better. I don't know how council feels, because I think we're not communicating between council and the director. So if that's the direction that council wants, to go back to the way Jim Jervis was doing it, because I think that's, if that's going to help us to understand it and make it as easy as painless, then let's go back to that process, if that's the way. I think by us just here and asking questions and drilling Bryce and him, you know, just trying to do his best, and I don't know if that's what we want to do. Drill him and, you know, try to find a mistake or put him on a hot seat. So if we can, let's communicate. Let's get our point across without any kind of double standards. Just, hey, this is what I want to see, as clear as possible. If you have any questions, talk to me, get this clarified. So it'll be easy for the next time. So that's my concerns, and that's my request for council.
Yeah, no, I will concur with that. Whether you go back to what we've seen in the past or not, the idea of it was the simplicity of it. In one sense can be overly complicated. It's a 200+ page document, but it's transparent enough that you could find the information you need to find, and where it's residing, and you know, it just had the information that we need. So I'm hoping we're not changing the idea to simplify it in such a way that we confuse the process. And I feel like I'm getting somewhat confused. And part of it may be the format of what we're doing right here tonight. We're trying to figure out, let me say this correctly, and tell me where I'm at. Maybe I'm losing it here, but I feel like you're trying to figure out what we want, and so that you're trying to show, hey, do you guys want this, this, and this in the draft budget, so I can get that to you.
That's correct.
Okay,
Yes.
but then that's where I get confused, because I go through some of this, and if you're doing that, then we're taking snippets from what was to make sure that's what we're wanting. But then I go into, I think you were talking on this last page, and this is one of the questions I asked you gentlemen earlier. The CIP, so that's what, page 23 on that document.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that estimated out to 2024, 2025. So that tells me that we have a draft CIP, but I'm looking at some of the numbers in here, and that was why I was asking the questions earlier, Gabriel, is, you know, well, theoretically $2 million, let's just call it $1.5 million in 2022, 2023 for the construct a fiber central office and emergency operations center. I don't remember us talking about that kind of money the last time we met and talked about EOC. The same thing is going to go for the City Hall project. Lord, I can find it. There it is. Number 1016. So 2023, 2024, we're going to spend $1 million for the initial planning phase of it. I mean, in a 2-year span, it's $1.5 million once again. So I hear what you're saying and asking. That's why I'm glad you said this. I hear what you're saying and asking. You want to see or know what we want. But then when I see what you're presenting, I feel like what you're presenting is, this is kind of where we're headed with it. And that's where I'm starting to get concerned. I get concerned when I start seeing the loan paybacks, because in one sense, we have a $4 million general fund loan that goes to the enterprises that's paid back at a low interest rate. And it still shows us that we have that $4 million available for use. But then on this last page, I see that we've got loan payments that have already started for these enterprises. So have they started? Have they not started? And this is why I'm getting really confused. And I don't know which way to take this right now. It just seems like it's being pulled in multiple directions, and there's no clarity to what's happening.
Yeah, and I think I can explain a little bit more. So what I'm really looking at and looking for council feedback is exactly what you said. What kind of information are you wanting? So in this case, what we're looking for is not really the numbers per se, but to make sure that, you know, are we presenting it the right way to you? Are you getting enough information? Now, these are all excerpts.
But that's
from,
just it. We are looking at the numbers.
Right, and so these were all from the 21 adopted budget. So what they likely did at the time was just move, again, I don't know for sure what the budget team did previously for the CIP, but they may have just, again, doing deferment, they may have just moved them back a year. Again, what was planned for in the City Hall replacement, I don't have a project charter for that. But again, working with Mike on the current CIP, we're only looking at an amount for just the study. And so you likely will not see those big numbers out there in the future. So we had pulled from the 21 budget just to kind of show and identify what those schedules were and to see if it's still consistent with the type of data that you're looking for. But yes, these numbers will change after the 21 budget.
So this was the meeting last year with, yeah, I was going to say Roger. I couldn't remember if it was Bill or Roger. Mr. Statler. And this was the one where I know I see the courtyard in there for $50,000. That was the last remaining. And then we froze everything else, correct? Okay. So everything just got pushed back is what I'm gathering. Is that what we did?
Correct. Any CIP project that seats general fund earmarked was deferred, correct? We're saying the same thing, deferred, postponed, it's the same thing. Yeah.
I'm not for sure. Are we okay? Or are we make those changes that we want to make change?
I'm not really sure of what we're doing. It just seems like we have a bunch of figures and we have a bunch of topics down here, and I'm not sure that our priorities are in order like we want them to be. And is that the only way that's going to be set in, and that's our direction, or are we going to have some, I don't know. I can't answer it. You know, I mean, I can continue to read this because that's what he's done, is he's read it to us, and I understand that. That's why I went back in last time and talked to. So, I mean, we're not adopting anything tonight. So,
No.
I mean, it's still the plan that's they're going to put together for us.
Well, this way will help them. This way we don't continue being in limbo in a sense. And at our next meeting we do this process again, and we're all going to be still in limbo. So how do we overcome the limbo part? How do we get to the point that we see what we want to see on paper?
And they're working on it. So,
Okay,
let's see what
so
comes out.
I'm good to go with what we have.
okay.
That's my opinion of it. I think what we have works well. And I don't know if you've seen that. And that might be bad service to you if you haven't seen what we're talking about.
Well, maybe that's what we need to communicate. So when you say everything's working well, meaning this is what we're doing currently, or what Jim did?
What Jim had set
Okay.
up.
All right, so that's
worked
what's well. That's what you mean working well.
Yes.
Okay,
So I have Jim Service's PowerPoints that he presented for the budget, and that's, we're planning to use that when we produce the actual budget book and go through each
Gotcha.
department. This is really just to make sure that the level of detail that we're going to include, again, keeping with the budget, is still what council is looking for. This is the same template that, from my understanding, Bill Statler used, and looking at the previous budget before that was still the one that Jim Service used. So we just wanted to make sure that the schedules are still what council is looking for. If there's any changes, if there's something that's just not quite getting across, just want to make sure that we give the information that council is looking for when we produce this book. But we can definitely use those PowerPoints as a template with what Jim did, and when we present the budget book to council.
And I sent the PDF copy of the budget to yourself, so you have that now. There are some items that you noted in here about the separation of line items, right? Specifically about fringe benefits, and completely understandable. I think it's good. I like the detail. I'm unique enough to know that I'm not unique. I'm weird enough. Let's just say weird, that I enjoy looking at that kind of detail. And sometimes I can overanalyze things very easily, but what's nice about it is it gives you the amount of detail you want, or it brings everything up and it gives you the simplicity that you want. So to each their own. And I'm okay with that. And I think it just really helped across the board as the council to understand what was happening. To Mr. Pete on the end over here, financials are always a mess to look at with the city. There's things that are going left and right all over the place. And so it's a lot to take in all at once. And so I think it's really nice to have a budget book that outlines that and shows that, gives us the details that we can, as we are at home, having something to read while we're laying down in bed or wherever you want to read it, you can read through that. At the same time, you have some simple look of it to say what's actually happening in that with a summary. Each one of the departments gave us a summary, and I think you guys can attest to that. There was a summary from each one of the departments of what was happening, the full-time employees that were in there, and then what was projected, what kind of things are we going to do this year and the next X amount of years with our department. And so each one had a little summary in front of that too.
Any more comments?
Mayor Council, just a quick comment though. Something to be aware of is that in the future, so as you know, the city converted its financial system to a full comprehensive ERP, enterprise resource program. Eden, the former software application that the city used, was outdated. It's a legacy platform, had limitations. And it's my understanding in working with Bill last year when putting the budget together is that it was the former administrative director used part Eden and a lot of spreadsheets. And so that's part of the reason my understanding is that the city converted to a Munis platform, because the new platform and ERP has the modules built in to generate a budget document, which is going to be a lot different than what you're accustomed from, because of what the format used was basically a workbook in Excel spreadsheet. So it's my understanding the former director exported the financial information from the Eden system, from the general ledger and so forth, and then plugged it into and dropped it into a spreadsheet. And then he had a very extensive workbook that tied all the different spreadsheets into the budget document itself. So if we plan to utilize Munis to its full capability, we're going to have to drop that format, because Munis has the capabilities to generate worksheets for budget that will basically do what we're doing manually. And you plug in a percentage into, say, a particular department or across all departments and say, let's do a 2% increase in fuel or whatever line item. And it has the capabilities of automatically doing that. And so I'm saying that if we plan to utilize the new platform, the new RP to its full capability, we will have to transition from the spreadsheet template to letting the software application do all that work. Otherwise, we're going to be doing still manual work because of the work that goes in with the spreadsheets and pulling the information from Munis to drop it into the Excel budget template, if you will.
So then you understand that's why I commented the fact that we are going to be seeing something different.
Eventually you will,
going, that's
yes.
right.
Right now, because we're still in the implementation of Munis,
Mhm.
not all the modules, and we're still having to do some cleanup from when we converted the financials over. But once all of that is up and running and all the different modules with business license and HR and everything is all, functioning and it's fully running, then yes, we'll be using that, and it'll look different simply because we'll be using and utilizing Munis to its full capabilities. So, but not today. I'm just bringing to your attention that you will at some point see a different template for that reason.
And I think that's okay. I have no problem whatsoever seeing change. I don't agree to change that takes us backwards. Meaning, if today we're able to see detail on a line of hours or employee counts or right to that nature, then I would like to maintain that moving forward. Now, the chart may not look the same with Munis versus what we're doing in Excel. I understand that. And it may be easier for you guys to pull that through Munis when we get there. But I don't want to see us move from the ability to see that kind of detail into not having the ability to see that kind of detail. I believe Munis, I've worked with ERP systems before, not Munis, right? But I believe they will give you that kind of detail as long as you tell it what you want. And I know it's going to take time to get to that, but I believe it's there. I just don't want to see us go backwards.
Yeah, and you're right. With any ERP system, it typically has a separate module crystal reports that you can not manipulate, but you can put different variables, factors that you want to pull data from. And if your ERP is functioning the way it should be, then you're able to pull that information. And that's going to require, say it's personnel costs, that the HR module is working and functioning properly, and then it's pulling it into the budget. And so, yes, that it does have that capability. I'm not I haven't been hands-on on financial systems for many, many years, but I know of them. And so I know that through Crystal Reports, you have some capabilities to customize certain reports and data. So, yeah, point well taken.
So are we ready to adjourn? Entertain a motion.
Sorry, just one more slide. Sorry, Mayor. Again, just a budget schedule update. We're looking to cancel the study session for May 4th. We have the first draft budget study session, May 18th, second draft, June 1st, and adoption, June 15th. This is to provide both 2 full weeks of time with council with the budget document, and then to arrange meetings with staff for questions on the document once it goes out.
The next thing we will see is a draft document.
Correct.
Thank you.
And then that completes the presentation. And then the recommendations were just any direction from council, which has been given along the
Almost
way.
last slide, right?
Almost last slide, almost that. So that does complete the presentation, Council.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye, opposed,